From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we're working on for you over the next 60 minutes. The acreage battle shaking up the markets as USDA gives us our first look at how acreage could play out this year. Cotton is capturing attention this year, and acres are expected to climb.
It's still not a driving factor. It's still not the break-even point, but it's the lesser of all the evils.
Why are more farmers turning to cotton? That's our Farm Journal report. And Andrew McCrae takes us on a trip to taste some of the finest chocolates in the world made in Texas. And in John's world,
data security. How concerned should we be?
U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by the dependable, long-lasting Chevy Silverado.
Now for the news that moved the markets this week. The highly anticipated USDA planting intentions report shaking up the markets Friday. USDA thinks farmers will plant more corn than soybeans this year. The prospective plantings report pointing to a 4% lower corn acres this year, right at 90 million. Now, soybean acres seeing a major shift, up 7% to 89.5 million acres. But it's cotton that seems to be the shining star. USDA thinks cotton acres could leap 21% this year to hit 12.2 million acres. And as anticipated, USDA pointing to a drop in all wheat acres with plantings projected at 46.1 million. That's an 8% drop in the lowest acres since 1919. And USDA had a double whammy Friday, also releasing grain stocks showing bearish numbers with rising stockpiles. USDA says corn stocks are 10% higher than a year ago. Soybean stocks set 13% higher than last year. But stockpiles of wheat look massive, with a 21% jump over 2016. The nation's hog herd continues to climb, but it appears expansion is slowing. In the quarterly hogs and pigs report out Thursday, USDA confirming the herd is expanding, with inventory of all hogs and pigs hitting 71 million head. That's up 4% from last year, but now that's down 1% from when USDA released the last quarterly report in December. Now, breaking it down, breeding inventory numbers are 1% above a year ago at just over 6 million head, and market hog numbers reaching 64.9 million head, up 4% from last year, but down 1% from last quarter. Brazil ordering 3 more food processing plants to suspend production this week. That's as an investigation is underway about alleged corruption in Brazil's meat industry. Brazil is the world's largest beef exporter, and meat companies there are suspected of bribing inspectors and politicians to overlook unsanitary practices. Brazil ordering the temporary closure of 6 of the 21 food processing plants under investigation by police. Now, as this is happening, Brazil is experiencing the worst recession on record. And in Peru, heavy rains and floods are making life pretty tough for people and livestock alike. Cattle ranchers accuse the government of not providing aid and support. In one of Peru's major cattle ranching sectors, cattle could be seen standing in mucky waters and thick mud. The Milk Producers Association said the storms have affected 37% of dairy producers in Peru, including cattle ranchers. All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, some nice rains showing up across much of the country this week, including areas that really needed the moisture.
Thanks, Tyne. Yeah, we've had some decent rains, and we have some more as we head into this week. We'll get to that in a moment. So the drought monitor takes a while to change. You can see the current one still showing some of those areas of drought in the southeast and the south central plains. This is back a month then, so let's see how it has changed over that last month. You can see some changes here and there. The area has expanded a little bit, but some of the worst areas have gotten a little better. And I think we will see things improve over the next couple of drought monitors over the next couple of weeks. And here's why. We have another wet storm system moving through the eastern third of the country as we start this coming week with a fair amount of rain in the southeast. This could have severe weather with it as well. Secondary storm system then will be diving into the middle of the country as well, and that will be causing some rain and mountain snows in the western sections. By Wednesday then, that first system is already long gone. The one over the Rockies is now moving through the Great Lakes with a cold front down into the southeast. More showers and more thunderstorms in the warm sector there, and a little bit of snow in the northwest fringe. Then we get a break. Look at that. Nothing going on. This storm finally moves away, but we have this one diving out of Canada. A little bit of a change in the weather pattern, which means some snow into the higher elevations of the Appalachians even, and parts of the Great Lakes as we end next week. quick shot of colder air, but at least it shuts off the moisture for a while. Another storm system does start to move into the west coast with some rain and mountain snows out there. Back in our next half hour with a longer range forecast.
All right, thanks, Mike. Well, how could USDA's first acreage report shake up the markets? We'll discuss with Brian Doherty and Danny O'Brien after the break.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Kubota. Tractors, hay tools, utility vehicles, mowers, and more. Visit Kubota.com today.
Welcome back. Well, a big report week this week with the acreage report coming out as well as stocks. So we'll break it all down this weekend with Dan O'Brien and Brian Doherty. All right, just to recap. USDA thinks corn acres will be down 4%, soybean acres up 7%, cotton acres up 21%, just a big jump there. Wheat acres down 8%. So, Dan, when you see these numbers, kind of what's your takeaway from this report?
You know, it's kind of what we were expecting in the beans. The markets have been trending lower over the last month. You know, headed into the first 2 weeks of March, we were between $9.95 and $10 a new crop. But we were expecting this move, and with higher production numbers coming out of South America, I think, you know, this is to be expected. What's a little bit interesting was the reversion back to the ag outlook number in the corn. And I think that may also have a lot to do with what's been going on in the last couple of weeks in the beans and the corn as well, and some of the weather also.
Yeah, definitely. Brian, this 90 million acres in corn, is that realistic?
Sure. Yeah, it is. You know, beans, let's start with the insurance rate, 10.19. So that attracts some bean acres from corn for sure. Cotton acres up, pull some from corn. So 90 million acres, not a surprise at all. Corn's currently trading at a level that really doesn't excite producers, and it doesn't excite lenders. So, you know, to see some shift to beans, no surprise. Old news now, so the market will start looking ahead and focus on weather as well as other variables that can come into play.
But it's just interesting when you look at the corn and the soybean and the acreage number. I mean, it's pretty neck and neck right now. Would you have thought a year ago that we would have acres, you know, so close to each other?
Well, I think you only get that when you have a disparity between bean prices and corn prices. So if you look at the ratio, that is, if you take the price of November beans divided by the price of corn, that's been trading around 2.6, 2.62, somewhere in that range for the last 3 or 4 months. That should buy acres from corn. Typically, if that ratio is about 2.45 or higher. So you've got that element. You've got outstanding demand in these markets, but bean demand has been excellent. So farmers had good success with beans the last few years with production as well, record yield. So I'm not surprised to see that shift toward more bean acres.
Dan, I mean, this is just really our first taste of the acreage number, right? And a lot can change between now and when planting wraps up in the country. So is there any caution for producers when you look at these numbers that were released on Friday?
Oh, definitely. I was doing a little research the other night, and the bean number can be off by 1.2 million acres. Historically, that's been about the average. The corn, about 1.1 million acres. So depending on the weather going forward and stuff like that, a lot can change. You know, and again, these estimates are taken in the first 2 weeks of March. The price of beans has dropped a good 20 or 30 cents since then, and corn now has moved a little bit higher. Guys are still making decisions, so all of a sudden, like you said, that ratio has changed a little bit, and you know, that can affect decisions if guys are more tending towards sticking with a rotation and thinking that maybe it might worth a shot taking corn instead of bean acres.
Well, Brian, if prospective plantings wasn't enough on Friday, we also got the stocks report out of USDA,
yeah.
And it shows growing stocks in all of the categories. So, what were your major takeaways from that?
Well, they grew a little bit, but they didn't. It wasn't an overwhelming number, but they added on a little bit to each. A little disappointed, I think, with the export pace the way it's been. That we were hopeful we might see that corn number remain the same or reduce a little bit. But if you add 30, 50 million bushels. What's really important at this time is the weather moving forward. So for your watchers out there that are livestock producers, really look at the opportunity to score low-price corn, buy it, get it in place, because we've got an entire growing season ahead of us. The corn industry is underwater. It's not working for producers right now, which means it's a bargain for end users. Get it locked in. We've got record demand. The handwriting's on the wall. Now, that doesn't mean prices have to rally. But the last 10 years, the lowest high in July corn has been $4.35. So if we think about that, any weather disruptions with this lower corn acreage number today, it just creates a heightened sensitivity. The springboard to all of this is very good demand. That's not changing. That ship is sailing and will continue to sail until prices are higher.
So you think corn prices could move higher? Yeah.
I do. Our probability studies tell us it can. It's doom and gloom right now because we had such a big crop last year. And we have to recognize that 174 bushels in yield, that blows everything out of the water. Historically, we haven't been able to back-to-back record yields like that. We've had 4 big crops in a row. Anything less than ideal weather, watch the funds go from heavy short to heavy long in a short period of time. So a lot of things to look for out there, but end users should take advantage of. We think there's limited downside risk in the next 3 to 4 months.
So sounds like some possible opportunities there. Dan, when you look at all these reports that came out on Friday, would you call it bearish or bullish with some of these crops? I mean, I know how markets ended up, but what would you say?
You know, I'd call it a little bit friendly in the corn. And what's interesting, as you mentioned about the funds, is they have been very fickle recently. They went in the corn from long somewhere around 80,000. In the last 2 weeks, they flipped that position to short 100,000. Now, the record short position in corn is over 200,000. But I think in the spring, with prices at this level, I don't know how much more you want to chase after a short position with a whole growing season ahead of us. So I think, you know, these funds kind of direct these markets and sometimes not reflecting the fundamentals, right? Earlier this year, we had them going after cattle, copper, cotton, soybeans, all on an inflation play, and something outside of the agricultural realm, they flipped and turned around. So again, if the funds decide to come in and change their tune, I think guys got to be ready to take advantage of that. And when we get to good levels, protect those prices when they happen.
Dan mentioned cotton. Coming up in our second half hour, we're focusing on cotton and why we're seeing a 21% bump possibly in acres this year. But as the guys mentioned, you know, this report now, it's old news, and now we've heard a lot about weather. So South American weather here at home. We'll talk about all that when we come back on U.S. Farm Report, so don't go anywhere. All right, welcome back. Well, we were talking about the reports during our first roundtable. So, weather. Let's say we don't have a lot of weather hiccups. Let's say we end up with at least trendline yields. With this acreage number, how does that shake things up as far as our stocks go?
I'll take this one. Well, what it does, if we're talking about trendline yield in corn, we'll have less of a crop than last year. It'll tighten up carryout, but the market will view that as adequate. So unfortunately, that probably means limited upside potential. But that's one scenario. So there's all types of scenarios that may play out here. Typically, we get some adversity. So my suggestion would be, as a producer, recognize that with the stocks and acreage numbers today, we've tightened the noose a little bit. Corn prices move upward, you've got to be prepared to act. Don't turn bullish when corn hits 410 or 420 or 430 on December. Be selling into that high probability window that's where prices will probably likely peak. We would suggest with low volatility now, pick up your call options so you just sell against that rally without second guessing it.
We keep hearing about a possible weather market. When would that weather market hit? When could we start seeing weather move these markets?
Boy, initially, we could have that over the next few weeks. Again, if it stays wet and cooler, that could delay guys getting in to get corn planted. But then I think you got to wait typically till sometime in mid-June, you know, and heading towards July.
Yeah, and last year we saw that June-July timeframe. That June timeframe is when we saw prices peak. So could we have a repeat this year?
We could. We looked at record yield years, and then we said, well, what happens the year after? And over 50% of the time, the corn market peaks in June, July, or August. So if you think about it, it's intuitive. We're chewing through supply. As we get less on the supply side of the coin and more into the uncertainty time, prices have the ability to move up quicker and faster. So be prepared for those rallies when they come.
Speaking of weather and rain, South America, they've been getting some rain in some areas down there. Is that impacting harvest in any ways? I mean, are we starting to see some harvest hiccups down there? You know,
it's slowing it just a slight bit in Argentina, and there's, I think, about 10% of the area is at risk of some flooding, but I know they're looking for a couple of week window of drier weather in Brazil, so they are moving ahead really fast in Brazil. So I don't think there's anything real threatening down there right now.
Yeah, so not enough to really to move our markets at this time?
Yeah, we had that earlier in this year, but you know, these things can change real quick.
We also had a hog and pig report out this week that showed some mild expansion in the country. Is that just because we're seeing additional pork processing plants come online and growers are expanding in response to that? Or is it something else that's driving that expansion?
I think it's two things. One is the increased packer capacity, for sure. That's part of it, but it's cheap grain. It's cheap feed. This is a window of time when you look at the relative price of corn to where it's been the last decade. this is cheap for hog producers to buy and buy long-term feed. So that's a huge input to their business. So they are expanding, I think, for those two reasons, capacity and feed.
And milk prices. I mean, we had so much hope going into 2017. Prices, at the end of 2016, we saw some life. And then here we sit today, and prices do not look as good as we had hoped, Brian.
Milk is a demand and supply-driven market. So we've seen both this year. We saw really good demand for cheese pop in. We saw some talk about reductions in European production due to low prices, and milk prices rallied up nicely in fall, stabilized for 2 to 3 months, and then really came under pressure when demand started to ebb. And the other side of that coin is, again, cheap feed, cheap grain. Dairy producers are not holding back, likely to see 2 to 2.5% increase in production again this year. That's a lot for the market to absorb after increases last year.
What about worldwide? I mean, we heard that the production was going to slow in some other countries. Is that not happening?
Well, it ebbs and flows, and it does, and a lot of that is weather driven, especially New Zealand, depending on rainfall totals. But I think we take a step back further. The good news is you've got demand markets worldwide that are continuing to grow and burgeon, and that's where the support eventually will come from.
Well, so much to digest this week from all the reports and all the market action, but we'll wrap it all up with a nice bow in Markets Now when we come back on U.S. Farm Report, so don't go anywhere. All right, welcome back. Time now for closing thoughts. Dan, we'll start with you.
I think with this report, we want to stay cautious and protect soybeans. We had a good run up. A lot of it was fund driven. They may change their tune, and with this number, I think anytime you can get good protection in, and we have been aggressive about protecting beans since last fall, you got to take advantage of that. I think looking at corn, there is an opportunity for an upside there. Like you said, there has been tremendous demand. I was reading the other day that the rhetoric from the Trump administration about the NAFTA and Mexico has softened a little bit, and now they're talking about just tweaking NAFTA. So I think offending one of our friends is less on the table right now. So I think there's possibility of decent upside.
All right, Brian?
I'll keep it simple. Be prepared. We've got volatility ahead of us, weather, fund money moving in other markets. For corn producers in particular, recognize that corn prices are low and they're cheap because we have big supplies. But when you start subtracting some acreage or reduce yield or both, those numbers shift quite dramatically on the carryout expectations. Consequently, we could get a good rally, so make sure on the rallies you cover your sales, be ready for anything.
All right, thank you both for being here during this busy week. We appreciate it. Stay with us. John Phipps joins us next. Data and who controls data has been a concern for some of our viewers for years. John Phipps has more in this week's John's World.
As farmers adapt more data-generating technology, such as mapping programs for yields, soil characteristics, and a growing number of other uses, companies are springing up to help us extract useful information from this pile of digital records. In addition, we're using data management tools to track and analyze increasing amounts of financial information. I've spoken before about producer concerns about keeping these numbers confidential, especially as we collect and store them off-farm via the famed cloud. That worry is still with us, but we can now add another privacy question that will affect virtually all of us. Last October, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, proposed new rules to prevent carriers like Verizon or Comcast from collecting and selling without permission customer information about what websites you visit, when you visit, and how long you spend there. As you can imagine, this information has considerable value to advertisers. With the new administration and new FCC appointees, those rules have been canceled, leaving carriers essentially free to merchandise your internet habits. This is not a big deal to most Americans, especially if the data surveillance is somehow advocated as a necessary defense against terrorism, which is debatable. And even though we have little trust in online security, the problem is too complex to warrant the work needed to grapple with it. I don't have many words of wisdom here, other than the obvious advice to assume your information is at risk every time you log on to anywhere, just like you should assume you are on some video device anytime you are in public. But I will say this, farmers are likely fretting about the security of the wrong set of data from their farm. Personal data privacy should be a higher concern.
All right, thanks, John. Well, as you saw in the USDA planting intentions report, farmers in the South are high on cotton this year. We'll tell you why after the break.
Cotton on the roadside, cotton in the ditch. We all picked the cotton, but we never got rich. Singing, song, song of the South, sweet potato pie, and I shut my mouth. Gone.
From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. This weekend, we have much more ahead. Acres of cotton could climb this year, so why is it such an enticing crop to plant? That's our Farm Journal report. The art of making chocolate in the most unusual place. Andrew McRae takes us to the sweet spot in Hyco, Texas. And on customer support, it's a Clementine conundrum. Now for the headlines. Another week passes without a new USDA leadership in place, but thanks to a Senate Ag Committee vote late in the week, we're now one step closer to having a new Secretary of Agriculture. The Senate Ag Committee voting in favor of Sonny Perdue as Ag Secretary on Thursday. That confirmation vote coming a day later than expected due to the Senate's schedule. Perdue's confirmation is now on to the full Senate, but that could be backlogged due to the heated debate over Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. After next Friday, the Senate goes on recess for 2 weeks, returning just before the stopgap spending bill runs out on April 28th. As farmers face another year of lower commodity prices, the House Agriculture Committee is reviewing the financial health of the Farm Credit Administration. In preparation for the next farm bill on Wednesday, the Farm Credit Administration faced the lawmakers who want to know if the agency is financially sound as farm incomes continue to decline. During the testimony, Doug Stark of Farm Credit Services told legislators that it's during these challenging times that capital requirements of this industry remain viable and strong.
We're very pleased to report that credit availability is not a problem. The farm finance environment remains fiercely competitive, and the various participants, including commercial banks, insurance companies, and the farm credit system, all leverage their unique value propositions to attract customers and win business.
Stark also telling the committee that due to competition in the marketplace, farm credit rates remain low and service is high. The merger of Dow-DuPont took a major step forward this week when the European Union approved the plan. Dow and DuPont were able to overcome regulators' concerns with hefty concessions, including the sale of large parts of DuPont's pesticide business. Now, this merger is the first to win EU approval out of a trio of mega deals that stands to reshape the global ag industry. Now, as part of that approval, the two companies forced to sell off some of its business. The first came Friday, FMC announcing it's acquiring a significant portion of DuPont's crop protection business. FMC will pay DuPont $1.2 billion for the business, and in return, DuPont will acquire FMC Health and Nutrition's business. FMC is buying the global chewing pest insecticide portfolio, global cereal broadleaf herbicides, and then a portion of DuPont's global crop protection research. FMC says this will make the company the 5th largest crop protection chemical company in the world as far as revenue. The state of Georgia confirming its first ever case of avian flu in a commercial poultry operation. It was a flock of 18,000 chickens. The State Department confirming birds tested positive for low-path H7N9. All those chickens were culled. Georgia is the top chicken meat producing state in the country. The Environmental Protection Agency is now limited on the amount of farm data it can release. A federal judge approving a settlement agreement this week between the National Pork Producers Council, the American Farm Bureau, and the federal EPA. It limits the amount of information regarding livestock farms the agency can release. Now, under the Freedom of Information Act, the agency can only release the city, county, and zip code, along with the Clean Water Act permit status of a concentrated animal feeding operation. The agreement also forces EPA to conduct training on FOIA. The drought buster weather California saw this winter continues to show up in California's snowpack survey. The latest measurement taken this week shows electronic readings from 95 sites in Sierra Nevada show an average snow water equivalent of 45.8 inches. That's 164% of average for this time of year. California's Department of Water Resources says once the snowpack melts, it supplies about 30% of California's water needs for spring and summer. But the department does warn that the lingering effects of drought are still prevalent. with groundwater supplies short in the Central Valley. Much needed rain hitting the majority of the country this week. That moisture should help eat away at some of the drought parked across the plains and Midwest. The latest drought monitor showing conditions improving across Missouri, Kansas, also Colorado. What's considered a moderate drought in Missouri, or the tan shade, improving 19 points in a week. That same category is now 18 points better in Colorado. But in the southeast, as you can see, the yellow area, or what's considered abnormally dry, it jumped up 14 points this week. All right, that's it for the news. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with the national forecast. Mike, the 30 and 90 day, that's really critical for many of our viewers getting ready to plant. So what can you tell us?
Tyne, I think we're looking at some warmth in a good chunk of the country. We'll get to that in a minute. You can see our current weather pattern, though, definitely just one storm system after another. These are slow movers also. You can see by Wednesday, another one moving into the middle of the country. That begins to move east, and here's where the pattern may change, at least temporarily. We get a fairly good trough in the northeast for a while, quick shot of colder air, but then we kind of go zonal as we head into next weekend. So interesting, we might start to see a change as we head into the middle of April. However, April temperatures, I'm going above normal for most of the east all the way down into Texas. Below normal for the Pacific Northwest down into Nevada. For May, temperatures above normal for about the eastern third of the country. I'm going near normal for the plain states because I think you're going to be fairly wet, which keeps temperatures down. And then below normal temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. Above normal in the east in June. And in the far southwest, as far as precipitation for the 90 days, above normal for much of the Corn Belt and the Northwest. Below normal, western Texas and the parts of the Four Corner region. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, as we showed you at the top of the show, cotton is seeing a boost this year. USDA's prospective plantings report pointing to a whopping 21% bump in acres, with upland expected to hit 12 million acres this year. In February, National Cotton Council released findings from its own survey showing a 9.4% jump in overall acres. Now, this is a nice change from the mass exodus of acres cotton saw over the past decade. So what's making cotton more of a cash crop to grow this year? That's this week's Farm Journal report.
Okay, so this field here, I see the remnants of last year's cotton crop. Will this be in cotton again?
It will be in cotton again this coming year.
Como, Mississippi farmer Sledge Taylor loves to grow cotton. And this year, he's planting 3,500 acres, or about a third of his crop, in what was once a staple in this area.
We will increase this year about 25% over last year, and last year we increased about 25% over the previous year. So we've increased almost 50% in 2 years.
It's more than just Taylor jumping on the cotton train this year.
The year prior, I was at 0. Last year, I was at 3,000, now I'm at 5.
We're 100% cotton and have been for 20 years.
National Cotton Council's February planting intentions survey showing 12 states could see an increase in upland cotton acres this year. The council thinks the biggest jump in the Mid-South could be in Mississippi.
The bulk of the acreage increase in the northern part of the state, from Greenwood, Clarksdale, Tunica, and that area. I'm just hearing anecdotally that south of Highway 82 we won't see as big of an increase.
Now, based on a grower survey, NCC thinks the largest spike in acreage will show up in the West, with Kansas seeing a 42% bump over last year.
Kansas in particular is not that many acres. They're coming off probably 25 to 30,000 acres, and they may go up to as high as 50,000. Oklahoma's a little bit different story because they plant a couple of 100,000, and some of those numbers might be adding up to 300,000 or more acres planted this year.
Price is part of the equation, enticing farmers to plant more cotton.
This year, competing crops like corn are just so, the price of corn is so low and going lower every day that I don't want to grow much corn at all. And where the price of cotton has gone up a little bit, it's still not a driving factor. It's still not the break-even point, but it's the lesser of all the evils.
But the main driver behind the momentum in cotton is phenomenal yields.
Our yields were the best yields that we've ever made. The newer varieties, the yields, we're making phenomenal yields. The quality this past year with some of the newest varieties, the quality was outstanding. So that's part of it.
Higher yields and an acreage bump is giving new life to the industry.
Increased cotton acres will be a great benefit to the cotton industry as long as we can keep up with the export demand.
It's that demand that's been the shining star this year, helping cotton prices see a 10-cent run since January.
We're seeing some strong demand for U.S. cotton right now. The export pace is good. Vietnam's in the market, China's in the market. We're not seeing a lot of competition. So I do think there's some opportunities right now with the market strengthening.
Now, China hasn't been a big buyer of U.S. cotton this year, but those tides are starting to turn.
In 2016, China sold almost 12 million bales from their reserves. The reserve auction series was much more successful than anyone anticipated. Now looking into 2017, they started their auction series in March, on March 6th. So far, they had a really good uptake right at the beginning. It slowed down just a little bit. There are some concerns about the quality of the crop, but again, if China has another successful auction series this year, that could really put them in position in the next few years to become a large importer again.
She thinks that's something that could hit the market as early as 2018. Until then, the focus is on 2017. And while prices are better, there are fears it won't last.
The caution I would give producers is that as they look at these prices, and it's encouraging planting. So if it's a good enough price to plant, then think about pricing a portion of your expected production at these prices as well, because if weather cooperates, we have another 17 to 17.5 million bale crop. Other countries respond and increase production. I worry that there could be some price pressure as we get into the fall.
But for Sledge Taylor, the price and acreage story around cotton is growing excitement in his small town.
In the last few years, we've been making 1,250 pounds of cotton.
And this Mississippi grower is striving for an encore to 2016, reviving hope that cotton can be king in these Mississippi fields once again. Now, National Cotton Council told me today's prices aren't really enough to see a resurgence in infrastructure like cotton gins. But Adam says if there's a gin that shut down maybe a couple years ago, if prices continue to climb, we could see those come back online. Up next, John Phipps.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Welcome back. Well, finally, we have a viewer who stumped John in this week's customer support.
Okay, today we have a question that totally stumped me and my research skills, such as they are. This is from Grayling Willer. We bought a bag of those little oranges known as clementines, each having a sticker identifying its origin. I thought, these stickers say Alaska. It's hard for me to picture a citrus grove in Alaska. Do you have any information that might help explain? Well, thanks a lot, Grayling, and thank you for the challenge. To be honest, my first reaction is, this can't be right, followed by, I'll bet the label had AL for Alabama on them, which he has mistaken for Alaska. But no, at my request, he sent me the sticker. Now, I apologize for the size, but if I enlarge it anymore, it gets too fuzzy to read. But a small orange fruit in the doorway of an igloo with the word Alaska overhead sure looks to me like a clementine from our largest state. I can't find any information about clementines grown in Alaska, but obviously they are. I'm almost certain from what I could uncover is that they are being grown in greenhouses, but how the heck could they do that economically enough to then ship them down to the lower 48 and compete with the powerhouse California citrus industry? So, customer support is going to call this an utter failure on my part. If anybody else out there can give us a clue, Grayling and I would certainly appreciate it.
I think I'm going to have to do some research on that. That's interesting. Well, if you have any inside information about this or have questions of your own, feel free to email us at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. Next up, if you're a chocolate lover, this week's American Countryside is for you. If you're in search for some of the finest chocolate in the world, it may be closer than you think. We're on the road this week with Andrew McCrae to Hico, Texas.
Kevin Wenzel grew up about an hour and a half outside of Dallas, Texas. Life in the country was similar to others in his rural area, raising hogs, chickens, and cattle.
We were in 4-H, and I was one of the only guys in the 4-H food club.
But he longed to get back to his roots, so he came back to Hico, Texas to work in art and design. And he picked up another job that he figured would be just a pastime.
And I started making chocolates, but it was the chocolates that took off and was paying the bills. And I found that it was my new medium. Instead of canvas and paint, it was chocolate.
Kevin's food was art, and the art was very good to eat. Each new creation specially handcrafted, never using large machines or making huge batches that would need to be frozen. He also used fresh, local ingredients: peanuts, pecans, apricots, and peaches from the area. And even though Hico is miles and miles from a metropolitan population, people began coming here to taste his product.
A lot of people say we ruin them to Snickers. I like Snickers, but this is all about fresh. So it's quality ingredients, it's fresh ingredients, and also a fresh product. And if it's fresh, you can taste it, you know.
Kevin and his staff are always busy here in the kitchen, pouring, smoothing,
You need some more chocolate in here, I think.
cutting, and much more. There's a lot to do to create a chocolate masterpiece, both visually and tastefully. Business is steady, but a couple points in the year are very important.
Christmas is wonderful because we can get prepared for it. Valentine's we can get prepared, but you never know because it's guys who buy Valentine's, and guys always wait till the last minute. So my job is to have plenty at the last minute.
Kevin is humbled by the high praise his work receives. He's thought about opening a location in a larger city, but his customers say,
"Oh, don't do that. Part of the fun is coming to you." I actually have had people come from Houston on the way to Dallas, and they'll take a 2-hour detour and come to Hico because they want to come see us and they want to come have chocolates.
Some may say you need to go to the coasts or even around the world to find the best chocolate, but more people are finding you can come to one of Texas's small towns to truly find some of the best confections in the world. Traveling the countryside in Hico, Texas, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Thanks, Andrew. And you can hear more about Andrew's travels online at AmericanCountryside.com or just by downloading the Farm Journal TV app. Next up, Machinery Pete joins us for Tractor Tales, and we pay tribute to a church 300 years old.
Time now for Tractor Tales with Machinery Pete, the most trusted name in farm equipment.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. And this week we're off to Illinois to check out a style 1949 John Deere A.
We've got a styled 1949 A John Deere. We used to farm with the A, and before we got the larger tractors, and I was able to find this A in good condition, so I bought it. Didn't have to do much restoring to it. It was pretty well what you see. Really liked it, just one of my favorite in the collection. We just started looking, and we saw this advertised at a sale at Taylorville, Illinois, and we went to it and bought it. Did a little restoring to it, and it runs perfect. And we've had it in the Pana Labor Day Parade several times, pulling floats, and we put a parade seat on it so 2 people could ride on it. When my son got married, we used it to pull a rack wagon that had the wedding party in it. We pulled it around Pana, so it was kind of unique back then. We probably spent a couple months in the wintertime getting it all restored. And motor-wise, it was perfect, but it was just the metal on the outside, and we had to sand some of the rough part, repaint it. The rubber was fine on it when we got it, so we didn't have to do anything that way, but we had to repaint the wheels. Through the years, we've seen many changes, you know, in the tractors, but they're just nice to collect, and I guess mainly I collect them to pass them on to our son and grandsons.
All right, thanks so much. Well, today's Country Church Salute goes to the Hebron Lutheran Church in Madison, Virginia. Established in 1717, the church is celebrating its 300th anniversary this month. I said 300. I think that's the first, actually, that we've had on this show of a 300th anniversary. The church features a David Tannenberg organ, one of the only 9 Tannenberg organs still in use today. Our thanks to Ivar and Vivian Rundgren for sharing their story. And as always, we want to hear about your home church. You can send those to the address on the screen. Well, stay with us. We have some heartfelt from the farm stories to share next. Welcome back. Well, in times of tragedy, you know, that's when agriculture's true character shines. And after the devastating wildfire struck the plains, now is when help is needed, and that help is rolling in. Check out this video William captured of a convoy of trucks carrying hay and fencing supplies headed from Chillicothe, Missouri to Ashland, Kansas. That's 445 miles one way. And this isn't the first trip they've made or the first story we've heard like this. I've even heard of high school and college-age students volunteering their time during spring break. And a different kind of damage just south of Bartlett, Texas. Alan Meisner posted this picture of his friend's field, the corn destroyed by wild hogs. Now, this happened all in one night. He said every seed in the rows were eaten, and all of that will have to be replanted. Nora enjoying some time doing some nightly chores with her granddad this week. Thanks for that picture. And from our staff in Mexico, Missouri, Lindsay Binney posted this picture saying they're thankful for rain, but hoping the blue skies stick around for a bit. Well, thank you for joining U.S. Farm Report. Be sure to join us again right here next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.